Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and obviously when discussing armor, the first aspect, the one that comes to mind, is protection. How well can this armor keep me safe? But protection isn't the only aspect that we need to consider when talking armor, and possibly also when trying to understand what kind of armor would be the best option. Now, when discussing plate versus mail, clearly plate has the advantage in terms of the ability this kind of armor has to protect you. A solid, rigid, shell-like protection like that of the, I want to say late 14th century, late 15th century and even 16th century harnesses is the best option in terms of trying to keep you safe. It supports your rib cage, it encourages hits and blows to glance off, and it is harder to penetrate. But this, however, doesn't mean that mail isn't a good choice in terms of protection. Now, given much will have to do with what century we're talking about. In the 15th century already, just wearing mail wouldn't be considered adequate protection even for common soldiers. But mail has served warriors from all over the earth almost for thousands of years. So this is a kind of armor that worked. And even with the introduction of full plate armor after 1420, for example, all the way up to 1485, still mail was part of the full suit of armor. So yes, you will be wearing plate, but most of the times you would have some sort of mail, at least either protecting the areas that could not be protected in plate, so the gaps, or sometimes even just underneath it. But even after saying this, protection is not the only thing. There are other aspects: weight, costs, and most importantly, context. I feel like I've just summoned Matt Easton. Now, before talking about mobility and cost and context, so the other three sections that I'd like to talk about, I would like to talk about the sponsor that made this video possible and the sponsor that brought to you this video, NordVPN. Now, since today's video is about armor, therefore personal protection, I thought it was interesting to also talk about how to protect your data and surf the internet safely. So first, what is a VPN? It's a tunneling system that allows you to browse the internet securely and privately. It protects your data from anyone who tries to snoop on it. Privacy is very important, particularly for people who use the internet very often. Now, in my case, of course, as a YouTube content creator, I use the internet for work, but I also use it for entertainment. But I think this can relate to almost not only the people that work through the internet, but in general. I mean, if you think about it, when I'm at work, I'm on the internet. When I'm off work, I'm on the internet, because that's where I get my entertainment. So for people like me and you, most likely, that use the internet all the time, understanding how to protect yourself is very important. And that's where NordVPN comes in. NordVPN has over 5,500 servers in 60 countries, and they've got 24/7 customer support and double data encryption for increased anonymity. Get a 70% off NordVPN plus 1 extra month for free at nordvpn.com/Metatron, or use my coupon code Metatron. You can find a link in the description below. Let's talk weight. So, is plate armor heavier than mail? Well, a lot of people are used to classify armor based on how it is classified on video games and role-playing games, whereby leather armor is light armor, mail is medium armor, and plate is heavy armor. Now, for gameplay purposes, that's absolutely fine, but if you look at the reality, the situation here, well, then actually what happens is that even in a full suit of plate armor, the one single heaviest component is mail shirt. So the idea that mail is medium armor and plate is heavy armor doesn't really make sense unless within the rules of the role-playing game or video game, whenever your character is wearing full plate armor, you also imagine that he's wearing mail underneath it. Again, looking at the single components, a mail shirt will be heavier than a breastplate and backplate combination. The difference in weight between full mail legs and full plate legs is negligible, also because both will be suspended anyway, so there isn't a real big difference in terms of how much these weigh. There will be more complex and therefore also heavier configurations, but generally speaking, there isn't a huge difference. So if it were me, I would put both of them in the heavy armor category, even though keeping in mind that even heavy armor still doesn't restrict you that much. You can run, you can fight, you can jump, you can do push-ups, you can mount your horse, you can do loads of things even with the heaviest configuration, meaning tournament configuration. So weight isn't the one single category that will make you choose, am I getting this or am I getting that? But mobility can be. So let's talk about mobility. How well can you move in plate compared to how well you can move in mail? Now clearly in terms of mobility, mail, even though plate doesn't really block you or slow you that much, still mail wins the cake. Mail is more movable because of the nature of its less rigid and therefore less protective nature and construction. Now this is true, although the further up you go in the late Middle Ages, the less of a problem this becomes. Now you have the invention of placard, you've got movable folds, everything connects very well. Now for soldiers that fight on foot, and most importantly have to march, then I would say mail might be the best option. But for people who are mounted, like the nobles and the professional men at arms, Italian condottieri, then plate would be the best choice if it is available. And this is also one of the reasons why mail was so popular with the Roman army. Now there is also a component, financial aspect that we need to talk about with that, and I'll get to that in a minute. Supplying an entire army of heavy infantry that needs to, like the Roman legions were, that needs to march from Rome all the way up to Germany and France and whatnot, supplying them with full plate, including legs and arms, wouldn't have been advisable. And that's one of the reasons why I think, even though the Romans, yes, of course, they didn't have access to late medieval full plate, otherwise they probably would have used it, 100% would have used it on their mounted cavalry. But for infantry still, I think mail at that time was a very, very good option. Also because the Romans use a very big shield, so it's already not easy to penetrate mail, but when you have a big shield behind it, you're okay. It becomes more than sufficient, and it is easier for soldiers to march in mail. And this leads us to the economic and financial aspect of this choice. You see, medieval knights were extremely rich, and they were supplying and buying armor, so the best armor that technology could offer, which was plate. But they had to provide it for themselves. If you are a state, on the other hand, and your army is state-funded, imagine the costs of supplying an entire legion, if not 10, if not 30 legions, with full plate. I mean, that would have been, it's the feudal system also that kind of naturally leads towards the idea of, I've got to pay for my own armor, so I'm going to get the best I can. Instead, with the Romans, and we know that this is the case, the moment mass production became more prominent, so we're talking the late Republic, we see a decrease in quality. For example, if you look at before Marian reforms and after Marian reforms, helmets like the Montefortino, if you look at them before, they were made for specific individuals and only for the people who could afford them, so landowners and whatnot, and you know, with the old distinction of princeps and triaria kents, etc. And so these were small works of art. They were very good, very symmetrical, very well done. But as we move into Marian reforms, of course, there are a lot of advantages. Rome invests in the idea of, we want everyone with armor, but the armor that you were now getting, which was state issued, we see a decrease in quality. The knob sometimes is not symmetrical, is not perfectly centered. Generally speaking, they are of poorer quality. Economical reasons are also very important. So, is plate always better than mail? Well, it depends. Are you buying it just for yourself and you're very rich? Are you a condottiero, so basically like that's your job? Are you a man at arms, so you can afford it, it makes sense, you're investing into your business? Or are you a state that needs to fund an army? Because in that case, I would go for mail, with the only exception of a specific corps, like an elite corps of heavy cavalry and whatnot, which of course existed even in classical times, like the cataphracts and stuff like that. And this leads us to the last section, which is that of context. Context really plays king. After we have discussed protection, after we have discussed economic reason and finances, so Do you have the money to buy it? After we have discussed mobility, it is important to understand context. There is also personal choice. We know that some men-at-arms and even some noblemen chose to go for a sort of in-between. So they chose brigandines, which they would still wear over mail in most of the cases, rather than going for full plate, because brigandine is an in-between. It gives you a little bit more mobility. It is less expensive, let's face it, there is that as well. It was an option, and options are many. We shouldn't imagine like a medieval knight only having one armet, the most protective kind of helmet. Possibly a medieval knight, particularly a wealthy one, would have a series of helmets. He might have kettle hats, he might have, of course, armets, a barbute, like you know that was popular in Italy. So you could choose then, depending on how much danger he perceives he is in, a more protective or a less protective helmet, or he could even switch in the middle of combat if he really needed to, not while the opponent was in front of him, of course, but you kind of like, you know, switch, put up your inventory and change things and everything pauses. But I'm saying maybe if there was a moment where you can sort of breathe and the enemy has gone back but they're coming back in a little bit, you might have time to switch. If you really, you know, are feeling it, you're sweating like crazy, you need something a bit more open. We know that some knights prefer to do that. We know that some knights prefer to fight with a visor up. And context is important in choice of armor. And again, with armor now I'm extending to helmets. I'm extending to, for example, even gauntlets. You could choose a more protective mitten or a less protective but with individual fingered gauntlets and that kind of stuff. And that's been around as a choice since the times of mail, integrated to the shirt, to the hauberk, not just with plate. So, do we choose more protection? We lose a little mobility. Do we choose more mobility? We lose a little protection. That's how it's always been. So to wrap it up and give it a sort of final thoughts, yes, in terms of protection, plate is the best choice. But there might be contextual situations that would have to be examined case by case, where mail does have some advantages. But now I'd like to know, what would you choose if you could afford a full armor of mail or a full armor of plate? Which one would you choose to wear in battle and in duel? Well, let me know in the comments below. Okay, noble ones, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up. And if you're yet not members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Don't forget to check out NordVPN. I left a link in the description below. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.